This week we talked about a rhetorical situation, and just to recap, a rhetorical situation is takes into consideration both the audience, who the piece is written for, the purpose, why the piece has been written, and also the occasion or context, which is the moment that the piece has been shaped by, or the moment that the piece has been written into. And so what we have in front of us is an example of an article from the New Yorker. And this particular article is a profile essay. What a profile essay is it's a mix of narrative, interview. It provides a picture or a description of an individual. And in this case, the profile is of Joe Biden. So I want to talk about this article because I think it gives a good illustration of occasion. It helps us understand occasion or context a little bit more than some of the other examples that are posted on the Blackboard. So I think what we'll do is we'll start just by reading the first couple paragraphs aloud, and then I'll stop and talk about what we learn about the rhetorical situation. So the article is published in the New Yorker magazine. It's called Can Biden Center Hold? And then we have this little tagline here. After a career built on incremental progress, Joe Biden is promising a presidency of transformational change. The election will test whether his campaign can bring together a divided party and a beleaguered country. And we have our author here, Evan Osnos, and published fairly recently, August 23rd of 2020. All right. Welcome to my mom's house, Joe Biden called from the bottom of the stairs, an instant before his sweep of white hair rose into view. The former Vice President of the United States and Democratic nominee for president reached the second floor of a cottage at the foot of his property in Greenville, Delaware, a wooded, well-to-do suburb in Wilmington. He wore a trim blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a pen tucked between the buttons, and a bright white N95 mask. It was 99 days to the election. The death toll from the coronavirus pandemic was approaching 150,000, 3 times as many lives as America lost in Vietnam. The economy crumbled faster than any other time in the nation's history. In Portland, Oregon, federal agents in unmarked uniforms were tear-gassing protesters, whom Donald Trump called sick and deranged anarchists and agitators. On Twitter that day, Trump warned that the demonstrations would, quote, destroy our American cities, and worse, if sleepy Joe Biden, the puppet of the left, ever won, markets would crash and cities would burn. The man who stands between Americans and 4 more years of Trump lives with his wife Jill on 4 sloping acres that overlook a small lake. These days, the Biden place feels as solemn and secluded as an abbey. To avoid contagion, Biden's advisors had put me in a carriage house, 100 yards from the house where the family lives. The cottage, styled in Celtic themes, green shutters, a thistle pattern on the throw pillows, doubles as a command post for the Secret Service, and large men with holsters guns stalked in and out. Biden settled into an armchair across the room from me and splayed his hands, a social distance salute. The docs keep it really tight, he explained. So I'm just going to stop there. And we get an introduction to what is going to be a much longer piece that tells us about Joe Biden's career and his personal life. But what the article does that's really interesting is that the author defines the occasion of the rhetorical situation in the first paragraph. Why is this being written in this moment? It's being written in this moment, of course, because we are 99 days at the time of writing away from the presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But what else is happening in the country that may have shaped the author's attitude towards his subject matter? This author is very friendly to Joe Biden. He doesn't come out and support Joe Biden, but you can tell from the tone and the details that are selected that he is sympathetic to a Joe Biden candidacy. And some of the reasons why, or some of the reasons that may have shaped that attitude, we get presented to us in that first paragraph. So as I said, not only is the election coming up, but we are in the midst of a pandemic, one in which the author notes 150,000 American lives have been lost. And then he adds the detail, this is more lives lost than during Vietnam. The other thing that marks the occasion is that the economy is not in a strong position due to the shutdowns um, that were associated with the pandemic. And finally, the writer gives an allusion towards the Black Lives Matter movement in this last piece here. Um, at the time of writing, there was a lot of activity going on in Portland, Oregon, where protesters had really occupied a portion of the city, and Donald Trump had sent federal officers who were not unmarked federal officers to try to control or put down that demonstration. And so the writer, before he begins his profile of Joe Biden, sets that scene for us, and it helps us understand what is motivating the writer to write this in this moment, and what also may be shaping the rhetorical choices that he makes. Now, talked about in other places on Blackboard, rhetorical choices just refers to what are the moves that a writer makes when writing. What kind of words does he or she choose? What kind of metaphors does he or she choose? What kind of details does he or she choose to include or not to include? And those things are, of course, shaped by the occasion, but they're also shaped by the other two pieces of the rhetorical situation, and that is the audience and the purpose. The purpose of this piece is to inform or to paint a picture of who Joe Biden is as a candidate. But the other purpose of this piece is to elicit sympathy from readers, to sort of paint more of a picture of who Biden is, and try to bring people on board to be his supporter. So that's the purpose. The audience, we sometimes have to think about a little bit more because it's not as obvious. Some of the ways that we can think about who the audience may be is considering where the piece was published, what kind of language was used, and that will help us kind of think about who this is intended for. So we notice this is published in New Yorker Magazine. New Yorker Magazine typically has a little bit more of a middle-class readership, a more educated readership, and usually a little bit of an older readership. Like, this is not the kind of magazine that's read by teenagers or young people, but folks who are probably in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, and onward. Some of the things that we'll notice when we're purpose audience also is voters, right? Would be voters, and he's definitely running to people who are not in the Democratic Party camp completely, but people who might be on the fence and might be able to be swayed into the Democratic Party camp. So I want to point out just two more things that the writer does that show that the rhetorical choices he makes are informed by the rhetorical situation. Of course, we started with the idea that he acknowledges the occasion or the context that the writing is being born into. Now, this works for this piece, but it's not necessary, right? When you're writing your own compositions, you may choose to describe the rhetorical situation as part of your introduction. You may not, right? It depends on your purpose. Sometimes, too, the occasion or the context is not as obvious. So, for example, in the prose poem Girl, or in Leave Your Name at the Border, those Jamaica Kincaid and also Manuel Munez do not spend time describing the occasion in their introduction. So sometimes what that means is that you need to do a little bit of research to figure out what the occasion is, right? When was the piece written? What was happening in the writer's life at the time? What was happening more broadly in the world at the time? So there's that. Okay, so I want to just take you through a little bit, and we're going to just point out some of the word choices that the writer makes that I think suggests something about the audience. So in this paragraph here, I'm just going to read the first third of it. The trials of 2020 have dismantled some of the most basic stories we Americans tell ourselves. The world's richest, most powerful country has botched even rudimentary responses to the pandemic. Finding masks, making tests, and some agencies have proved to be so antiquated and starved for resources that they used fax machines to share data. The White House offered policies that read like mock Kafka. Even as people advised against dining out, it was proposing a corporate tax break on business moves. Let's pause there and just talk about word choice a bit. So we're zooming into words like rudimentary, um, antiquated. These are kind of more complex terminology. And so that suggests to us that we have a readership that's a little bit more educated, right? Perhaps people with college degrees, or at least folks who are in college and upward. We then get this reference here. The White House offered policies that read like mock Kafka. Um, Kafka or Kafkaesque is a term that refers to this German writer named Franz Kafka, who died a long time ago. But he's pretty famous for writing really dystopian short stories and novels, things that are about like the evils of humanity or that sort of show the worst possible situation that can happen in the world. So this detail or this particular reference also shows us that the audience is probably a more educated or an audience that has a literary background or at least a college literary background of sorts. Now, although he's writing to a more educated audience, he's also writing to a younger audience. And I want to just see if we can find this second detail here. Okay, here we are. So in this paragraph, the author is interviewing a number of people who know a bit about Biden. And then down at the bottom of the paragraph, we get this interesting detail where the author has interviewed a, a senior administrative official who worked with the Obama administration. And here's the context. Is because no matter what he does, he cannot completely understand the frustration of people in the streets. That's not a criticism, it's just a reality. A senior Obama official observed that Biden's acknowledgement also contained a subtler message. The message being that this country needs to just chill the fuck out and have a boring president. Okay, so this is kind of interesting because we had that really elevated language earlier, and now we're using slang and profanity in this detail. So the inclusion of this detail really suggests that we're trying to appeal to perhaps a little bit of a younger audience. That this may not be the kind of article that your grandmother would read and be like, okay, yeah, I get this, the criticism that's being levied against Joe Biden. So just to wrap up, all pieces of writing are defined by their rhetorical situation. And the rhetorical choices that the author makes are determined by who they're writing for, what their purpose is in writing, and what the occasion or context is. That is, what is happening in the moment that the piece of writing is born into.